Blessings and welcome to today's Law Enforcement Daily Devotional. Today is the day of the read that we've been building up to. Today we see the centurion of great faith. And just like some of the days past, I wish I had an hour or 2 hours to really lay this out because this is such an incredible story, and I think it is so important to law enforcement to see this character, the centurion of great faith. He represents the closest thing to law enforcement, in my opinion, in the entire Bible. This was a man who was um, given the orders to be a peacekeeper. That was his job. He was to keep the peace in the city of Capernaum. Um, Peace officers today are very similar in our duties and responsibilities to what he was doing. And more so, he was more a sheriff than just a law enforcement officer, but his soldiers had law enforcement duties. Riot control was one of the big ones. And I've got all kinds of notes for my read because this read today wasn't just the centurion of great faith. It was also about John the Baptist and him being in jail and questioning if Jesus was the one to come, or was there someone else that they should expect to see. So there's a lot of notes here. Again, if you want to see the notes, just email me. But I want to spend a little time on this centurion because, first off, there's so many aspects to it. There's the city of Capernaum and how important this place was. It's set on the three main trade routes in all of Israel, and you could almost argue in all of the Middle East, because the first trade route was the Via Maris, which was located, it went right through Capernaum. Then you had what was called the King's Road, or they also called it the Ridge Route. And then the third one was the Way of the Sea, because Capernaum sat on the Sea of Galilee, and a lot of trade came right through that port. So even though Capernaum was not a huge city, it was a very, very important city to Rome because of the amount of taxes that were collected in this city from all the trade routes that went through it. Foreigners would come, on these trade routes going from Egypt to Babylon, or Babylon to Assyria, or Assyria to Mesopotamia. This route connected everything. And because of that, a lot of people that would come through would hear Jesus's words, watch him heal, hear the Sermon on the Mount, and then they would take these teachings back to their own countries. So this city's influence, I think that's why Jesus chose this city, because the amount of strangers and foreigners that would come through on a regular basis that could hear him and take his words back to their own country. He had more access to people in this city than anywhere else. But because of this, and because of its importance to Rome, it had a garrison. And cities this size did not have garrisons. Garrisons were reserved for cities like Jerusalem, big capital cities where there were lots and lots of people. But again, Rome wanted to protect her interest in her money, so they put a garrison in this little town. Now, the garrison was there for one reason only: to keep the peace. They wanted to keep the people happy. They didn't want riots. They didn't want an insurrection. They wanted people to feel safe to travel through there. No threat of being robbed or mugged or anything like that. It was a pretty safe place to be because these soldiers were there to keep the peace. And the centurion was the sheriff that oversaw all of this. Um, Quickly, in Luke's version, we even see that the elders of the city of Capernaum come out and talk to Jesus and on the centurion's behalf, and they tell Jesus that this centurion, number one, he loved the people, but number two, and probably the greatest bit of information I see coming out of Luke chapter 7, the centurion built their synagogue. He built the synagogue right there in Capernaum. We've seen in Mark and earlier places that we've read up to this point that Jesus has taught in the synagogue a couple of times. Jesus has made his home in Capernaum. We're going to see the ruler, the man who is in charge of this facility, this synagogue, there's one man that's in charge of this synagogue. He's called the synagogue ruler. We will see him later demonstrate the exact same actions that the centurion exhibited, as far as knowing that Jesus could heal and heal from a distance. And he followed the centurion's example. And we're going to talk about how he understood Jesus' power and authority and where he got his information. I think it all stems from the centurion. He had great faith, but he also had great influence, and he was a man of integrity. And he talked to his friends about Jesus, and he told everybody he knew about Jesus because of this experience of Christ healing his servant. It's an incredible story that I bet probably 30 verses total contain the whole story, and there's nothing else written about him, but we see him everywhere, or we see his influence in a lot of different places. Again, he's a sheriff, and in one instance it says after coming down off the mountain, this mountain where Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount sat behind Capernaum. The mountain being here, the city of Capernaum here, and then on the other side was the Sea of Galilee. So when Jesus came off the mountain teaching the Sermon on the Mount, he went right into the city of Capernaum. Lots of foreigners and strangers and people from other cities were coming and following him into Capernaum. So the centurion and his soldiers, who were there to keep the peace, seeing this huge crowd come in, would have to dispatch and stay close and make sure there's not an insurrection or a riot. Or there had been a lot of Jewish leaders who had tried to more or less overthrow the Roman occupation, because Rome is an occupying force. They're there to collect taxes. And the Jews hated him for it, although they didn't hate this centurion because he loved them, and he showed it, and they loved him back. He's such an interesting character. But when the city is overrun by strangers and crowds following Christ, it could be a problem, because if Jesus says, let's overthrow the city, and he takes that city, this centurion's in trouble, because he's been tasked with keeping the peace. Jesus was the ignition point. You had to hear everything he said to make sure he wasn't leading the people into or just stirring them into a frenzy. So you have had to have someone close to hear what Jesus was saying. And I'm speaking on law enforcement behalf. If you wanted to prevent a riot or quell it or stop it pretty quick, you had to have somebody close to the ignition source to hear what he's saying and make sure he wasn't stirring up the crowd. Then you had to have the centurion close by, because he's the man who gave the orders, who made the decisions. I think the centurion himself was listening to what Jesus had to say. And I think this is how he learned of Jesus' great authority. And this is how he came to understand and know who Christ was, and to believe him and put his faith in Jesus. Run out of time, but man, this is one of my absolute favorite stories in the entire Bible. I hope you spent some time reading it and looking at it. Tomorrow, get back down. Tomorrow we're in Matthew chapter 12, Mark chapter 3, and Luke chapter 8. All these will be on the last slide, so you can copy them down. Until then, you guys be safe.